I wanted to thank everyone for coming today to the U.S. Consulate's press conference with Acting Assistant Secretary of Consular Affairs, Michelle Bond. I've already introduced myself, and I'm Hillary Renner, and I am the new Public Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Consulate in Toronto. Michelle Bond has been Acting Assistant Secretary for Consular Affairs since April of 2014, having joined the Bureau as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in December 2012. She previously served as the U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Lesotho, and before that as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Overseas Citizen Services in the Bureau of Consular Affairs. Ambassador Bond is a Senior Foreign Service Officer with more than 35 years of experience in Europe, Africa, and Latin America. Acting Assistant Secretary Bond will make brief remarks providing an update on consular services for our 7 consulates and the embassy in Ottawa. She will also discuss operations at the Consul General here, which is our largest post in Canada, and we adjudicate 95,000 non-immigrant visas per year here. After her brief remarks, Ambassador Bond will then take your questions. I also wanted to just let you know a little bit about the bureau that she represents at the State Department. Consular Affairs, the mission of the Bureau of Consular Affairs is to protect the lives and interests of American citizens abroad and to strengthen the security of United States borders through vigilant adjudication of visas and passports. The Bureau issues the travel documents that allow Americans to travel the globe and lawful immigrants and visitors to travel to America, and provides essential cycle of life services to American citizens overseas. So Ambassador Bond, today we have journalists. I think they represent many different languages and countries, and some of them constitute the largest numbers of visa applicants at the Consul General in Toronto. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for being here this afternoon. I will just open by saying how happy I am to be in Toronto, my favorite country or city outside of the United States. I think I've been here many times, and I'm always very happy to be here. So let me just make a few remarks, and then I would be very happy to respond to any questions that you might have. The U.S. mission in Canada is comprised of the embassy, which of course is in Ottawa, and 7 consulates. The embassy and 6 of those consulates have consular operations, which provide services to U.S. citizens, whether they are living in Canada or just traveling through, visiting, perhaps studying. And they also provide services to non-immigrant visa applicants. Non-immigrant visas are the visas we issue to people who are tourists, business travelers, students, people who are going to work but on a temporary basis. Those are just some examples of non-immigrant visa categories. We also issue immigrant visas here in Canada. All of the immigrant visa applications are adjudicated at the U.S. Consulate General in Montreal. This large presence in Canada, to have the country, really is emblematic of our 2 countries' friendly, strong, close relationship. There are lots of American citizens here in Canada, and of course there are lots of Canadians in the United States. The United States and Canada have one of the closest consular relationships in the world. Canadian citizens do not require a visa to enter the United States to visit, to work, or study in all but a very few cases. For the most part, Canadian citizens are not coming here to our consulate or to any of our consulates for a visa because they do not require a visa to go to the United States for most purposes. Our embassy and our consulates in Canada work together to ensure that we are providing an equally high level of customer service to all of our patrons, all of the people who are coming to us for services. Canadian citizens, U.S. citizens, and citizens of third countries, not U.S., not Canada, but any other country. A few words about this Consulate General here in Toronto. It is the largest post, the largest U.S. post in our diplomatic mission in Canada. And as Hillary mentioned, our non-immigrant visa unit here in Toronto adjudicated more than 95,000 cases in 2013. Our non-immigrant visa unit here and everywhere else here that we have a consulate in Canada is here almost exclusively to respond to the needs of individuals who are not Canadian citizens. Because as I mentioned, Canadians don't need visas. So when we talk about 95,000 visas having been issued in 2013, 97% of those were issued to people who are not Canadian, but and most of them, not all, but many of them live here in Canada. So they are people, in most cases, who are immigrants to Canada from other countries. We process visa applications for citizens from more than 170 countries, because as you know, Canada is proudly the home of citizens from many, many countries. And it's actually 98% of our applicants are citizens of countries other than Canada. On a typical day, each one of our consular officers interviews about 100 applicants for a non-immigrant visa, and they may come from 50 or more countries on a typical day, but altogether we see more than 170. Our staff speaks more than 18 languages to interview applicants whose native language often is not English. Sometimes the applicants will come in accompanied by someone who speaks their language and English, but we do have people on our staff who speak more than 18 languages. In 2013, we issued nearly 2,000 investor visas, primarily to Canadian citizens, as well as nationals of other countries who are resident in Canada, because the United States has a treaty of commerce and navigation with Canada, and therefore citizens let me be clear about this. We have a treaty of commerce and navigation with Canada and with several other countries. Therefore, we can issue investor visas to citizens of Canada and to citizens of those other countries with which we have that treaty arrangement, and some of those citizens live here in Canada. So the visas are issued primarily to Canadian citizens, but also to some other nationals with whose country we have a treaty. There are about 600,000 U.S. citizens living in the part of Canada that Toronto, this consulate, is responsible for. And at any given time, there are more than 1 million U.S. tourists in that area. So our staff here at the consulate is here to help U.S. citizens with routine and emergency services. Routine services would include issuing a passport, registering the birth of a child, performing notarials, helping people register to vote. As you know, we have elections coming up in November. Those are the kinds of services that we would provide that are not emergency services. Emergency services would include assisting the family if a U.S. citizen dies while here, assisting an American who has been arrested and charged with a crime, assisting an American who has been the victim of a crime, and there are many other services that we provide. The American Citizen Services Unit here at this consulate handled more than 7,000 passport cases, approximately 1,350 consular reports of birth abroad, in other words, children born in Canada who acquired U.S. citizenship at birth from one or both parents. And we provided more than 4,000 notary services in 2013. So this is a very busy building with people coming in for services. Our goal here and at every single one of our diplomatic posts in Canada and around the world is to maintain the highest possible level of customer service for every single person who comes to see us. We've made a lot of improvements here, and we are continuing to look for ways to improve our level of service. As an example, a year ago, it was not unusual for the people who were coming in to apply for non-immigrant visas to spend as much as 4 hours from the moment they arrived to when they finally left after having had their interview. That's really unacceptable. It's just, people shouldn't have to give up half a day to come in and apply for a visa. And it was related to the level of demand, but what we have done is to take a good look at how we're organizing the work and find ways to reduce that time so that today, I'm happy to say, that it's more typical now to spend 1 hour or less here at the consulate when people come in to apply for their visas, and we will continue to look for ways to shave that time down and to make we have a lot of respect for the value of our applicants' time, and we do not want them to waste hours sitting and waiting for us to be ready to assist them after they've come into the building. We are going to continue to work on that. Ensuring that people here and in any other country around the world can apply for a U.S. visa promptly when they think that they need one and want to travel to the United States is also a priority for our government. We are required to maintain a service level so that people can get an appointment for a visa interview within no more than 3 weeks. And at almost every single one of our diplomatic posts around the world, we are within that 3-week wait time. At most of our posts, the wait is less than 3 weeks. We provide priority appointments for some travelers. Students are one example, because we don't want students to start classes late if they're attending a school in the United States. Currently, it takes about 15 days on average to get a visa interview appointment here in Toronto. And if people are applying for a visa for an emergency purpose, suppose someone in their immediate family has been involved in a bad accident in the United States and they're trying to get to the hospital to be with them, or if there's a funeral or for some other urgent travel like that, we do everything possible to provide an immediate urgent appointment for that sort of travel. We also conduct quite a lot of outreach to the residents of this consular district. In order to maintain the highest possible level of customer service, we want to make sure that we're getting the word out to people about what to expect when they come in for a visa interview, what to bring with them to show that they are eligible to receive that visa. We want people to have good information and to feel comfortable and prepared for the interview when they come in. So both the non-immigrant visa unit, the staff, and also the members of our staff who work in the American Citizen Services unit conduct outreach throughout the year. We are promoting travel and tourism in the United States. Of course, we're doing our best to strengthen our country's economy. And we also like to welcome Canadians and Canadian residents to the United States. And we try to provide useful information to U.S. citizens who are living in or visiting Canada. Consular officers in Toronto visit over 20 colleges and universities in Ontario each year to discuss the visa process for students who are going to the United States for tourism, education, and work. We have a Mandarin language blog with over 10,000 hits that explains the visa process. The consular officers have conducted outreach both in person by traveling to talk to groups, for example, and through televised interviews each year with diaspora communities in Ontario, including the Chinese, Somali, and Tamil communities. The consulate created a video to explain the visa process that is available on YouTube in 10 languages. We have consular information sheets talking about the visa process and other subjects of interest posted on our website in 8 languages. And American consular officers also speak about e-visas, these are the investor visas, every year at various business events in Ontario. This year, in 2014, the consulate conducted a Reddit Ask Me Anything session where people asked questions about non-immigrant visas, American Citizen Services, and the U.S. Diplomatic Service, we call our Foreign Service. This was the first official event conducted between the U.S. Department of State and Reddit. So Toronto broke some new ground there globally. And then I would give as another example, the American Citizen Services Unit conducts outreach to Amish communities in Ontario, as well as American communities in relatively remote areas like Thunder Bay. So whether we're doing it in person or virtually or through various sorts of social media, our goal is to provide clear and useful, actionable information to any individual who might be planning to come to us for a service. We would consider it to be a failure, so something that we want to look into and figure out ways to avoid. If we see people who are coming to the consulate twice in order to complete their business, if somebody comes in to register the birth of a child and didn't know he was supposed to bring the child, or he didn't know that he had to bring the child's birth certificate, or we should have information that is so clear and so redundant that people know exactly what they need so they can come in and take care of what they need to do the first time they come in, if possible, unless there's a complication with the case that we have to help them sort out. So that's my message. We're here for new Canadians. We're here for people who are immigrants to Canada who are not yet Canadian citizens. Of course, we're here for Canadians, for U.S. citizens. We want the people who turn to us for assistance to walk away from this building impressed at what a good job we did. And so our goal every day is to do better than we did yesterday and think of new ways to be responsive and helpful. I would be very happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Sir.
On the subject of
may I just ask that you identify yourself, please?
Sure. William Doyle Marshall, CHRY Radio, and a member of the National Ethnic Press and Media Council of Canada. On the subject of e-visas, can you give us some stats on that in terms of who are some of the people applying, where they're from, are they all Canadians, or are they some of the others?
I'm not sure, well, I don't have in front of me very granular detail on that. I know that most of the folks that are getting e-visas are Canadian citizens. Some of them, of course, may not have been born in Canada, but they have now been naturalized Canadian, or they were born here. And are you thinking of what kinds of? Okay. Well, for example, there are two types of e-visas. There are people who are engaged in business in the United States that requires them to travel regularly. An example is that there are quite a lot of Canadians who are motivational speakers. They speak on a variety of subjects, but they're inspirational speakers. And so they are regularly giving talks or participating in events in the United States. And so if that's their business, that would be an example of someone who might qualify for an e-visa. That allows them to be working and traveling back and forth to the United States as frequently as they need to do. There are people who have invested in a real estate business in the United States. So as you all know, there are some Canadians who like to travel to the southern United States during your spectacular winters. And there are some examples of Canadian citizens who have said, okay, I'm going to set up a business in Florida or somewhere else in the southern part of the United States, and I'm going to market to Canadians that are looking for properties that they can buy and spend part of the year in. So restaurants is another example. So people may get either an E1 or an E2 depending on the type of business, the type of investment that they are making. But those are just a few examples that we see of investors.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Suleyman Gohin, editor of Turkish Kurdish newspaper. Miss Bond, I fill out application for the United States. Of course, I help people actually. And also I fill out other forms, first in German, French. One thing, be honest with you, I found your application very tiring, very exhausting. After I fill out that, I felt very tired. And I actually raised this issue before. And why? I mean, too many, for instance, you ask date of birth, person's grandfather, grandmother. Even they don't know, they don't remember, people, I mean, would you have comment on that?
Sure. I have heard this before. And it's true that we ask a lot of questions on the visa form. I don't think we ask about your grandparents, but we do ask about parents, I think, in some cases. We ask, for example, whether people have immediate relatives who are living in the United States, because it's germane to the visa process. Part of when someone is applying, let's say, for a tourist visa, part of what we're trying to determine is, if this person gets a visa and travels to the States, will he or she do what they say they're going to do? Are they, go and spend 2 weeks touring the United States and then come back here to Canada? Or might they decide to stay in the United States? So, and that's a difficult thing, of course, for us to determine. We can't know what people's intentions are. But what we're looking for is evidence that people are so well established here in Canada that it really wouldn't make sense for them to stay in Chicago and work illegally as a waiter, for example. So that's what we're looking at. And sometimes what people, when people are refused, it may be because they haven't been here very long and they can't show that they're established here. That this is their home now. This is their life. And so it's not at all unusual for a person to be refused a visa, and then a few years later they qualify for that visa because they have more to show about what their established position is. It's true that we ask a lot of questions, but part of what results from that is that when people come in for their interview, we already then know quite a lot about them, and we can make it a much more quick and efficient and focused interview. When I first started out in the Foreign Service, and we had a shorter form, a lot of those questions were what I was asking during the interview. Have you been to the States before? Do you have family in the States? How long have they lived there? What do they do? Now that's all in front of me, so I can quickly scan and ask, maybe a few questions, approve the visa, and move on to the next applicant. So it really does help us to be more efficient because we have asked these questions already. So we appreciate your patience. Sorry?
Another question might be security.
In some cases, some of the questions are certainly related. We ask about whether people have a criminal history, for example, and that's related to, you would want to know that before you invite someone to visit your country. Sir?
Peter Galiachos, Lada TV Network. We have a question from Greece, where the Southern Europe has a lot of economic issues. There's a lot of people that want to come back, or Canadians that used to live in the States. My question is, these people that did not get American citizenship, and they were just American residents with a green card, after 10 years living either in Canada or in Southern Europe, where they find now they can't get jobs, what is their position and what they have to do to come back and live in the United States? We get that question quite often.
Okay, so this is a question about someone who had been living in the States with a green card and then left, either to live here or perhaps back in their native country, right. And now they would like to get a green card again.
They did not get American citizenship,
right.
Just said.
Yeah. What normally happens in those situations is that person will have to qualify again for the green card. Most of our immigrant visas worldwide are issued to people based on their family relationship to someone. So it's someone who's married to an American citizen, or they have an adult child who's an American citizen, or they have a brother or sister. Those would be examples of how you might qualify for an immigrant visa. So if they still have that family relationship, then that American can file a request to the government to give green card status, immigrant visa status to their relative, and they can come back. But there are also some situations, for example, not long ago, someone called me and he said his sister had been living in the States with a green card, and their mother in Pakistan was ill. So the sister went back and was living and caring for the mother, and she was out of the country, out of the United States, for 3 or 4 years. And she could not leave her mother, and the mother couldn't travel, couldn't come to the States. So the sister stayed there for those years, cared for her mother. Eventually the mother passed away. So he called me and he said, now what does my sister do? How does she come back? So we do have a process for situations like that where people have stayed out of the country for some time for reasons that are beyond their control.
Specifically, the question that I was didn't express well is there a time frame from the time they leave the United States that they lose the green card status or whatever?
Yes, normally if you leave and you're away for 1 year, you will lose your status. However, if you anticipate that you might be away and you're not sure, like the lady with the sick mother, you can request in advance permission to be away for 2 years. And normally that's as long as it can be. Now you can always come back and spend some time in the States and then go back out again and sort of refresh it. But normally if you've been away for 10 years, unless you can show something that really prevented your return, you have to start over from scratch.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And
when you say about immigrant to Canada, there is two kinds of immigrant. There is residents and refugee.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get their residence yet. Do they have the same to get to United States as a visa, or just this is for residents? Why my question is focusing on. I am Saad Al Safar from Iraqi media. I know everybody knows Iraq from problem. So many people we have from my community, refugee, they come, some of the family to America, some of the family to Canada. And now, if there is any special treatment for them to visit the family from Canada while they are refugee?
Right. Well, it's true of every single application that we try to adjudicate each application individually. We look at the specific situation of that person and make a determination. So it could be, if someone is a refugee, so this is hypothetical I'm trying to describe, it would depend on whether that person has the right, or one of the things we'd look at would be, does this person have the right to leave Canada and travel to the United States or to Sweden or wherever and come back? Because sometimes I think it's possible for a refugee, they've been offered refuge, but they may not be able to leave and come back. So, of course, if someone doesn't have permission to return to Canada, we probably wouldn't approve a visa for them to travel to the United States because they'd be stuck. So really it would depend on the circumstances of the individual. But in principle, if someone can show that his home is now here and his intention is to make a short visit to the United States and he has the money to pay for it and so on, theoretically there's no reason why that person cannot qualify for a visa.
The other, Canadian government, they issue passport with no citizen. They have done that. This is a big issue, the passport for emergency. Is that acceptable for America?
Yeah, again, we'd have to take a look at that specific case, the purpose of the trip, the circumstances. So it really, truly isn't possible for me to give you a general answer to that question. Yes?
Being a journalist, do we have to apply for the permit for the visa to work, for example, to go as a correspondent for the publication?
Yes? An I visa?
They could. I mean, it depends on why they're going. It depends if you're a journalist and you want to work in the United States. There are a number of different visas we offer, not to take the floor.
No, please.
But, we have the I visa, which is a special journalist visa. We've seen a lot of journalists working with our public affairs section here who qualified for I visas who've gone to the U.S. to do work. Some journalists do work on e-visas in the United States. Some work on other types of visas. It's just the circumstances really are what changes that. So we would have to know the specific circumstances about the case to see which visa applies.
Thank you.
Can I have a follow-up?
Yes, sir.
Madam Golden.
Ambassador,
It was Madam Golden, European Club of Canada.
Thank you.
Madam Ambassador, first of all, we welcome you to Canada again.
Thank you.
And my name is Ricky Castalvi from the Philippine media, and I would like to follow up on that answer of the gentleman. if you're just covering the White House or the United Nations, do you need any particular visa to go in?
It depends, like I said with his answer, on what's happening with your case and what's going on and who's sponsoring you and things like that. A lot of factors go into it.
Because in my experience, I've been to the White House and I did not ask any visa as a Canadian, and that is as well as in the United Nations on the General Assembly. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
My name is Andrew Mazurek. I'm writing for a local Russian language newspaper and TV station. Local is very important in this context. And the question is somewhat related to this. To what extent the global situation affects the consular services? And to give more detail, is there anything the Russian people living in Canada, Canadian citizens now, have to know when they're applying for US visa or something dealing with the US consulate? And on the other side, we work a lot with different artists who tour North America, so they go Canada and US, and we notice that sometimes Canada still gives out visa, but US started denying more and more visas from Russia. Would you have a comment on that?
And these are groups that are coming from Canada?
From Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So they're coming from Russia to US and then to Canada and back.
I see. Okay. Well, your first question had to do with individuals who are originally
Who
Russian
reside in
citizens
Canada, but
and
Russian
have,
citizens, yes.
and have Canadian citizenship. So if they're applying with their or traveling on a Canadian passport, they don't need a visa.
But if you're talking about investor's visa or any other types of...
But again, if they are Canadian citizens, then they would benefit from the treaty arrangement that we have with Canada. So we would treat them as a Canadian citizen. I do not believe that there's any change in the treatment of visa applications for performers and other groups coming from Russia and traveling to the United States. So I'm guessing that if you think that you've seen a shift, it may just be that you know about a few cases and they happen to get refused, but they didn't represent the whole universe of applications. There would be no reason. That's not a political thing. If a dance group or whatever, I don't think that there's been any shift at all in the adjudication of that type of visa for that type of travel.
E-visa, it is just for Canadian citizen or the residents, non-Canadian citizen can take it also?
Correct. You'd have to be a Canadian citizen or the citizen of another one of the countries. I think there are, do you know offhand which ones they are?
There are quite a few countries. I'm
And
not
we have
sure
a
the
list of them.
I can give it to Hillary and she can send it to all.
Yeah, but being a resident of Canada would not qualify you for it. You have to be a citizen of a country with which we have an investor, because that treaty enables U.S. citizens to be investors and work in those countries. And so that's how that works. It would be bilateral.
My final question, if I may. For Canadian citizens retired that want to purchase a property for their vacations in the United States, a lot of them have some surprises. Is there any advice you have to them before they make the decision to purchase, whether it's the surprise with the taxation? I don't know if you can answer that question, because what is required from the U.S. taxation department as far as Canadians purchasing property in the United States for their vacation?
Okay, I'll give you a very general answer. And don't buy property based on what I'm about to say. You would want to. You would always want to consult with someone who's an expert and a good advisor. But generally speaking, in the United States, people pay taxes on what they're earning. So if you are a retired person who is traveling to the United States to stay in a property that you own, and maybe you spend 5 or 6 months a year there, you wouldn't have to pay taxes if you're not working in the United States. You would probably have to pay property tax on the property that you own, because almost, I think, every jurisdiction assesses some taxes on the local property. So you would be responsible for that if you bought a home. But otherwise, speaking very broadly and generally, I would say. You don't have to pay taxes in the States if you're not working there.
If you sell and make a profit, I guess you would have to pay U.S. tax, I assume.
Perhaps, but you would want it may depend on the state where you are, it may depend on lots of things. If you sell and make a profit and take that money and buy another property, that would probably have an impact on the situation, so really.
Right. Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming.
Safe trip home.
And I'll send out information on the e-visas because I think that's a follow-up question, and just let me know if you have anything additional. Thank you.